We begin a new Pedic. Rabbi Eliezer Aimer. Zog the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer Aimer. Rabbi Eliezer says, Toilin es hamashmeres. You can hang a sifter. Basically, you have sort of a can or a canister, and you hang a cloth on top of the can, and then you can pour through it wine to sift it from the sediments. So what happens? Are you allowed to hang this on Yom Tov? What would be the issue? Why shouldn't you be allowed to hang it? The answer is because when you hang it, you're sort of creating an oil. It's hanging, it's covering, and it creates this temporary tent. So are you allowed to hang this on Yom Tov? Rabbi Eliezer says it's not a problem. You can hang this mashmeres, sifter on Yom Tov, and it's not an issue with hanging an oil because it's an oil arai, it's a temporary thing, and for the purpose of oichel nefesh, to be able to sift your wine, it's allowed in Yom Tov. If it was hung before Shabbos, you're allowed to use this on Shabbos to sift your wine. You're not allowed to hang it on Shabbos because you're making a temporary tent. But if you already hung it on Shabbos, so then you're allowed to use it to sift. And the reason is because Rabbi Eliezer's shitta is that this is not the regular way of sifting. It's not exactly clear why not, but this is what Rabbi Eliezer apparently holds, that sifting is not regularly done this way. For the wine, that is, or the malacha of Beirer is not usually done this way, and therefore it's allowed to be done on Shabbos. The Chachamim say, "Ein toilen es mashmeres b'Yom Tov." You're not allowed to hang this sifter on Yom Tov. You're making an oil arai, so it's not allowed. Ve'ein noisnen latluya b'Shabbos, and also the issue of Beirer, the issue of sifting, even if it was hung on Shabbos, you're not allowed to use it for sifting. Aval noisnen latluya b'Yom Tov. On Yom Tov, you are allowed to use it for sifting on Yom Tov, as we'll see in the Gemara, the Pshat and all of this. Zok the Gemara. So basically, the basis of what Rabbi Eliezer said over here is that an oil arai is allowed to be made on Yom Tov. Frek the Gemara, hash to Rabbi Eliezer. Now we learned before that according to Rabbi Eliezer, oisufi oil arai loy mesfinon, you're not allowed to add anything to something which is an oil arai. Even just to add something, you're not allowed to. Lemevad lechatchila shari. So lechatchila to go ahead and to make an oil arai would be allowed. Maihi, what's this case where we saw that Rabbi Eliezer says you can't add the Tanan? We learned in the Mishnah not long ago here, we learned in Shabbos, Pekaka chaloin, the shutters of a window. Okay, we learned about this Barichas already. This may be talking about a window, this may be talking about a skylight. Rabbi Eliezer says, Bizman shekoshev etoloi, if we're talking about the shutters that are tied to the house and it's suspended off the ground, then you're allowed to shutter the windows. But vimlav, if it's not tied, so it's a separate thing, you're not allowed to use it as a shutter on Shabbos. Even though this is sort of a temporary thing. Put it on, you put it off, and it's something which is just adding. You're adding another thing to shutter. Otherwise, the sky, the roof or the wall is there already. Still, you're not allowed to add even a temporary oil. The Chachamim say no, it doesn't matter. It's a temporary thing, so you're allowed. Benkach or benkach, paikikim by either way, you're allowed to shutter with it. Everybody agrees that to create an oil arai, a roof, which is an arai roof, you're not allowed to create even on Yom Tov l'chatchila. Needless to say in Shabbos. The reason there's a machlokes regarding this shutter, because you're adding to the oil arai. Rabbi Eliezer says even to add to an oil arai you're not allowed, unless it's already connected to the structure, so it's already considered to be part of the structure. Needless to say in Shabbos. You are allowed to add in Shabbos to a temporary structure, and needless to say in Yom Tov. So what do we see over here? Rabbi Eliezer is the one that says that if it's an oil arai, you're not allowed to add. In our Mishnah, he's saying that you could create an oil arai. You could place the mishmeres on top of a can that is an oil arai in order to be able to sift with it. So what's the difference? And for the Gemara, Rabbi Eliezer savalak Rabbi Yehuda. In our case, the reason it's allowed is because Rabbi Eliezer holds like Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanya, we learned in Abraisa, Ein ben Yom Tov l'Shabbos. As far as Malach is concerned, there's no distinction between Yom Tov and Shabbos. Elo eichel nefesh bilvad. Only for eichel nefesh, you're allowed to do malacha for the purpose of the preparing the food. Rabbi Yehuda mater. Rabbi Yehuda says it's allowed. Af machshirei eichel nefesh. Even other preliminary things that you're preparing in order to be able to do the eichel nefesh, that's also allowed. So over here, to place the sifter, which is a preliminary, in order to be able to sift the wine, even that's allowed for the purpose of Yom Tov. So although Taki you're making an oil arai, and Rabbi Eliezer holds that it's asur on Yom Tov, but if it's for the purpose of sifting the wine, it's allowed. Fragt the Gemara, when does Rabbi Yehuda say that it's allowed? When those preliminaries you're preparing for the food, that it couldn't be done before Yom Tov because it's going to be something that won't be fresh, it won't be good. So then you're allowed to do it on Yom Tov. But if you have a machshir, a preparation, a preliminary stage, which could have been prepared before Yom Tov, does Rabbi Yehuda hold that you're allowed to do this on Yom Tov itself? So over here, why couldn't he have hung the sifter before Yom Tov? And for the Gemara, so again, mi shametle, and for the Gemara, the Rabbi Eliezer adifim Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, he holds like Rabbi Yehuda, but he actually even goes a step further than Rabbi Yehuda. He holds that you're allowed to hang this oil arai on Yom Tov, although you could have prepared it before Yom Tov. Even in such a case, he holds that for machshirei eichel nefesh, it's allowed. So he holds like Rabbi Yehuda, but even more than Rabbi Yehuda. Taisus adds to this that the only reason that he's matter to such a far extent, even though it's only machshirei eichel nefesh, and it could have been done before Yom Tov, is because this oil arai is only an issa midrabanan. So therefore he was matter it. So the Chachamim say that this is not allowed. You're not allowed to hang the sifter on the canister on Yom Tov. You're making an oil arai. The question was asked regarding the opinion of the Rabbanon. Tolamai, if he did hang it on Yom Tov, what happened over here? Is this an issa midairaisa or an issa midrabanan? Omer Rav Yosef, Tola chayev chatos. If you hung this on Shabbos or Yom Tov, you're making an oil arai, you chayev chatos. Omer Abaye, so Abaye asks the question: this case of hanging a sifter on a banister on a canister is mamish like a chayev chatas? Is he making an oil? How could that be? If a person just hung a kuza, which is a jug, on a sichta, on a hook or on a peg, that's also considered to be a binyan. It's obviously not a binyan. So the Gemara is asking, just like that's obvious that it's not a binyan, it should be obvious that this is not enough of a binyan. It's just an oil arai that you shouldn't be chayav achatas for it. Abaye says midrabanan. You're right. If someone hangs this oil, this mishmeres on Yom Tov, on Shabbos, it's only midrabanan. And the reason is shlayase kederech shu oise b'chayil. It's also because this is uvdin d'chayil. This is similar to what's done during the week, and that's why Chachamim asked it. Whereas other Rishonim say this is something that is can bring you to sifting, it can cause you to do a malacha midairaisa, so therefore the Chachamim asked it, but it's not as asam and atayra. Now the Gemara brings a few different things together that are in the same inyan, the same of making an oil on Shabbos. Manket Abaye collected halachas, chumri masnaisa, certain details of different braises, v'tani, and he learned them together. What are these details? Hagoid. A goid is some kind of a leather sack, cloth that they used to store things inside, to preserve it, and then they would use it out, or they would use it to travel with it, or to contain things inside. But then when they arrived to whatever place they came to, they took everything out, and then they hung this leather cloth on top of it to sort of protect it, to preserve it. So you're making some kind of an oil. The mishmeres that we spoke about here, the sifter, and a kilo, which is a canopy. The Gemara soon will talk barichas about a canopy. The kisei galen, a chair which is made up of parts, and you take it apart and you can put it back together. Lo yasa, these are things that you're not allowed to make on Shabbos because you're making an oil. V'im asa, if you did, potter, then you're going to be potter. It's all temporary oilim. These are all temporary tents. It's not a permanent structure, and therefore it's also to make this on Shabbos or Yom Tov, but if you did, it's potter, aval aser. All a kava, if you're making an oil which is there to be bekvias permanently, lo yasa, you're not allowed to make it on Shabbos or Yom Tov, ve'imasa chayev chatas, you'll be chayev chatas. Aval, mita, a bed. We're talking about a regular bed, and that the way then they would use these beds is they have a bed, and then to have space in the room, they would lift up the bed against the wall, and then you could put it back down to sleep on it at night. So that bed, which is lifted up and placed down, or kisei traskel, basically as a kisei traskel is a folding chair. It's made in a way that you can remove the part that you sit on it and you can place it back down, sort of a folding chair. And va'asla, also a chair, but it's made as a toilet seat where a person can sit on it. So these things, mutal and taisan l'chatchila, you're allowed to make them, you're allowed to open them up l'chatchila, or put them down l'chatchila on Shabbos, because it's l'chatchila made this way to open and close, and it's not even considered to be an oil arai. This is the way it's designed l'chatchila. It's not parts that you take apart, but it's a folding thing that you put up and down that's allowed to be made l'chatchila on Shabbos. The next thing it said in the Mishnah was that Chachamim say you're not allowed to put into a mishmeres to sift the wine on Shabbos. The question was asked, Shimer Mai, if you did sift on Shabbos with this sifter, what's the halacha? Is it midayraisa or midarabanan? Amar Rav Kahana, Shimer chayiv chatas. You sifted the wine with this sifter, you chayiv chatas. Maskefla Rav Sheishes. Rav Sheishes asks a question. Mi ike midi, the Rabbanan mechayiv chatas. Is there a case that we find that the Rabbanan would say that you chayiv chatas? Rabbi Eliezer shari lechatchila, and Rabbi Eliezer, another Tana, regarding the very same case, says that it's totally mutter. You don't usually find such extreme arguments in one thing. So the Gemara says, no, you don't. Maskefla Rav Yosef, alam aloi, why not? I'll bring you a case. And we learned this not long, actually a while ago already. In the Gemara before, when it talks about the things you're not allowed to carry out in Shabbos, various different jewelries that you might come to carry them. Hare'ir shel zahav. You have a piece of jewelry which is made like a brooch, but it's made in the shape of a city. The Rab Meir mechayiv chatas. Rab Meir says if you carry that, it's like carrying, it's not considered to be a regular piece of jewelry, and therefore you chayiv chatas. And Rabbi Eliezer shari lechatchila. And Rabbi Eliezer says this ir shel zav is a piece of jewelry that you're allowed to carry, and there's no chashash that she might come and take it off to show it to people, and you're lechatchila allowed to carry it. So we see this kind of extreme machlokes. Where do we see this? The Tanya, we learned in Abraisa, a woman is not allowed to go out with this ir shel zahav, with this piece of jewelry made like in the shape of a gold city. If she goes out, it's a chi of chatas. Chachamim say, she shouldn't go out with it on Shabbos, but vim yatsa, if she did, petura, she's pater. Chachamim's concern is that she might come to show it to people. As long as she's wearing it, it's a jewelry, it's like a part of a garment, and there's no chiyuv chatas. There's a gzeira midarabana, she might come to show it to people. That's what the whole gzeira of jewelry that we learned, if you remember, that you're not allowed to go out with it on Shabbos. Rabbi Eliezer yaitzi isha be'ir shel zav l'chatchila. So as Rashi over here brings, who wears this ir shel zav? A prominent woman. Prominent women don't take off their jewelry to show to people. She leaves it on her garment, and therefore there's no chashash that she's going to take it off. So we see here this machlokes menakatza lakatza between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Meir. Amalei Abaye, so Abaye says, but no, it's not exactly a comparison to the case that we have over here. Mi savres Rabbi Eliezer ad Rabbi Meir koi. When Rabbi Eliezer says that it's mutter, is he responding to Rabbi Meir that says that you chayav chatos? The Oma chayav chatos. Ad Rabbanan koi. He's responding to the Rabbanan, the Omri Potter Avalasa. Rabbanan that said Potter Avalasa. That's who he's responding to. Va'amalahu, and Rabbi Eliezer saying to the Rabbanan, that he holds that it's totally mutter. But to have a case of a Mishnah where you have just two Tanoim, and one Tana says that it's totally mutter, and the other one says that it's a chiyuv chatos, that Abaya argues we don't have a case for that.
The fact is he's still arguing.
And a chanami, you're right. So there's still an argument here on akatza lakatza. So as we'll see right now in the hemshech of the Gemara is not really mekabel this teretz from Abaya. And we paskin that if Shimri Yechayev Chatos, because it's like a shvacha teretz, because sof you see that there is an argument regarding one action which is menakotza lakotza. So the Gemara stays with what Rav Kahana said in the beginning, that according to the Chachamim, Shimri Chayev Chatos. And the Gemara now will continue on this.
It looked like it was like, would you argue on the Chachamim like this? So I understood.
Why not? He's speaking to the Chachamim. The Rabbi Eliezer is responding to the Chachamim.
I argue with the Chacham that the Chacham would say something like Chatos, and he would say that it's.
And Rabbi Eliezer says that it's mutter. That's the pshat in our Mishnah, according to Rav Kahana, yeah. No, so the Gemara asks now on this, like I said, the Gemara remains with that svara that Rav Kahana said, that you chayav chatos. So mishumay masrinam bei. Which malacha is Shimmer connected to? When you give the asra, so you have to give the asra for the right malacha. Which malacha is this? Rabba says mishum beire. The malacha here is beire, selecting the eichel from the pseilas. That's the malacha. Rab Zera says mishum merakid. The malacha is not beire. The malacha is merakid, which is sifting with a sifter. It's very similar, but it's a different. There are three malachas: beire, merakid, and zayra, that are very similar things where you separate the eichel from pseilas. But there's beire when you're selecting, and then there's merakid when you're sifting. So there's a machlokes over here what the sifting of the wine is. And now the Gemara explains the svaras. Amar Rabba says, Kavasa de mistavra. The way I say that sifting the wine is connected to beire makes more sense. Ma darkish or beire, just as it is with the case of beire, noitel eichel. You take the food, umaniach pseilis, and the pseilis is with the food that you don't want is left. Af hacha, so too over here, noitel eichel, umaniach pseilis. You have the wine that goes into the can, and that's the wine that's going to be drinkable, and the pseilis you leave behind. So therefore he says it's similar to the way beire is done. Now, there's a big and obvious question on this Gemara, which Taisus brings up over here, and Taisus spoke about it before in the sugya of beire. Usually by beire we say it's the opposite. The isser of beire is only when you take the pseilis and you leave the eichel. Here the Gemara is saying is that beire is that you take the eichel and you leave the pseilis. So Taisus says that it depends what's more. Derech klal, when you talk about beire, for example, you're eating fish and there's bones in the fish, there's more eichel than the pseilis. So therefore, you take the pseilis out and you eat the eichel. That's usually the way beire is done. But in a case where you have much more pseilis than the eichel, there the derech is that you take the eichel and you leave the pseilis behind. And that's what we're talking about over here. The wine we're talking about has so much pseilis that there's very little eichel, and therefore over here the derech of the malacha of beire is that you take the eichel and you leave the pseilis. Therefore he says it's compared to beire. So that's Rabba's shitta. Rab Zera says, no, it's not like beire. It's merakid, it's sifting. What's unique about merakid is, the way a sifter works is, the pseilis remains on top of the sifter, and the eichel flows below, goes on under the sifter. That's exactly what you're doing over here. Pseilis mumayla and v'eichel mulmata. The pseilis remains on top of the sifter, and the eichel goes below, which is not the case by beire. Beire, as Rashi brings, it's usually the other way around. The eichel remains on the top, and the pseilis goes to the bottom. So therefore, it's similar to merakid. So Rashi's shitta in this sugya is, Rabba doesn't really disagree with Rab Zera. Rab Zera disagrees with Rabba. Sifting wine, it's very clear that this is mamish merakid, this is sifting. Rabba is made to Rab Zera that if you give the hasra from merakid, that this is merakid. Elamai, Rabba is saying, besides merakid, it also has a certain nature to it that it's like beire. So you can give the hasra either from beire or merakid. Rab Zera is saying, no, the hasra has to be dafke merakid because this is mamish sifting, this has nothing to do with beire. Now we go back to the halachas of making a tent, a temporary tent on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Tani Rami Bar Yecheskel. Rami Bar Yecheskel asked the shaila. Talis kfula, you have a talis that you're putting on top of poles. You have 4 poles, and you have some kind of a structure of 4 poles with attaching poles, and then you're putting a talis over it, like a chuppah basically. So you're allowed to put this over on Shabbos. Lo yasa, you're not allowed to do this on Shabbos. And the word kfula means, as Rashi explains, it's not just the talis that's on top, but it comes down. It comes over a little bit, on the sides as well. So you're not allowed to make this. But v'masa potter avalasa. It's potter, but it's also, this is a temporary tent. If this talis, this garment that you placed on top for the temporary tent, is already tied with some kind of a rope or some kind of a thread to the poles, so it's tied there already in advance, so then that's something you're allowed to make on Shabbos, because it's already tied there in advance. So there's 2 shittas over here in Taisus, what we're talking about. One shitta in Taisus is, dafke, if it is open a tefach. If it's already open a tefach, then you're allowed to extend it and open it more, because you're only being meisiv to an oil arai, and we learned before, according to the Chachamim, that if you meisiv to an oil arai that already has a tefach, it's allowed. But there is another pshat in Taisus that even if it does not have a tefach, just because it's tied already and it's there, it's only an oil arai. Isra Chachamim made an oil arai if it wasn't tied to it yet. But if it's tied, even without a tefach, it's allowed. The Alter Rebbe and Shulchan Aruch paskins that this case of an oil arai is only allowed if it already has a tefach. Then you're allowed to extend it further open. It could be different cases today when you have such a thing, when you have something that's, I'm not sure if awnings has the din of an oil arai. Not sure if it has a gather of an oil aron, or you have to ask a Rav when to get to that. It could be it has a gather of an oil kva. It's not just stam talis that you're putting up, a garment that you're putting on poles. It's something that's built in and made that way. It could have a din of oil kva. But in the case of an oil arai, if it's fixed already before Shabbos and it's open at tefach, you're allowed to extend the opening.
This is very common. Children playing, making tents.
And if it's already
a sheet, they make a tent.
So, but it has to be a fixed. It has to be. So if it's not fixed before Shabbos and the stam throwing a sheet and making it over, oil arai is also with the rabbanan on Shabbos. Correct. Rav Kahana asked the question from Rav. Kilo mao. What's the story with a canopy? Amalei. So there's going to be various different responses here, contradictory responses, and the Gemara is going to explain. So first he asks him, what's the halacha of a canopy? Are you allowed to make it on Shabbos? Amalei, so he responds to him, af mita asura. Even to make a bed, to put down a bed, is also also. You make a bed, so you have below the bed. It creates an oil, it's also not allowed. Then he asks him, mita mahu. How are you allowed to make a bed on Shabbos? Amalei, so he responds to him, af kila muteres. Even to make a canopy is allowed. Then he asks him a third time, because he's not getting over here a very clear answer. So he asks them both together. Kila umita, a canopy or a bed. Mahu, what's the halacha? Are you allowed to make them on Shabbos? Amalei, so then he says that there's a difference. Kila asura, to make a canopy is not allowed. Umita muteres, but a bed is allowed. Okay, so obviously he gave different answers that don't match up. So what's the pshat in all of these responses? V'loi kashya. There's no question regarding how he responded here. It depends what the case is. When he says that you're not allowed to make a bed on Shabbos, what are we talking about? Kid karmenoi. We're talking about the bed of karmenoi. Rashi says this is the same bed that we spoke about before, which is taken apart. It's made up of different parts, and you have to put it back together. We're not talking about a bed that you just fold up against the wall and then place it back down. That kind of a regular bed that you fold up and put down, that's allowed. But if it's a bed, you have to marshal these beds that come out of a sofa that you can take it out, right? These sofa beds, you take it out and take it in, that would be allowed. But over here we're talking about a bed that's made up of parts, like a traveling bed, and then you put it back together. That's something which it's a noel arai, but it's not allowed. When he says that a canopy is allowed, Kederami Bar Yecheskel. Like we said before, Rami Bar Yecheskel said that we're talking about a canopy that you already attached from before, and therefore it's oil arai, you attach it from before, or could be it was even open a tefach, so that's allowed. Kila asura umito muteres, and when he said that a kila is not allowed and a bed is allowed, kidididam, like the regular case that we have by us. If a person creates a canopy from the beginning and it wasn't attached from before, so that's not allowed. And a mito, a regular bed, not a bed made up of parts, a regular bed that you lift up against the wall and you place back down, so that's a bed that's allowed to be put down. Rav Yosef said, Chazina luhu lekila debe Rav Huna. I saw by the canopy of Rav Huna, the meurte negidu, at night it was put up, in other words Friday night it was up, umitzafra, Shabbos morning, chavita ramya, it was put down to the ground. In other words, they dismantled this canopy. So you see that he held that this is a kind of canopy that you're allowed to put up on Shabbos and you're allowed to dismantle. If you're allowed to dismantle it, Rashi says, that's an indication that this is a kind of canopy you're allowed to put up. That's how baina, the malacha of baina, saiser and baina go hand in hand. So what kind of a canopy was this? Taisus over here says that this was a canopy, like we said before, that it was already attached from before Shabbos. It was open at tefach already. Because it's open at tefach and it was attached from before, so therefore you can put it up and down.
Be very to get a trundle bed. Pull it out and pick it up. Is that a problem? Or making
L'chayra not. L'chayra, that's similar to the beds that he says over here, that you just lift it up against the wall and put it down. A bed that goes up and down, l'chayra is the same thing. The only problem with a bed is if it's mamish parts. You take it apart and you sort of fold it up and then you put it back together. Another halacha of a tent that is allowed in Shabbos, viloin, to put up a curtain, mutal in taisa and mutal lefarka. You're allowed to put it up and you're allowed to take it down on Shabbos, and it's not a problem. We're talking over here about a temporary mechitza. Okay, this is actually a big machlokes rishonim and get a temporary mechitza, if it's allowed or not. Rashi's shit over here is, Rashi says it here and Rashi says it in many places, a mechitza, a curtain that you put up, a temporary mechitza is allowed to be put up on Shabbos. And the Alter Rebbe paskins like this Rashi in Shulchan Aruch as well. The Alter Rebbe brings it up in the Geil Mashal in Aron Kodesh. you have an Aron Kodesh, and you put up a mechitza in the Aron Kodesh, you want to put up a pareiches. So now obviously if the Aron Kodesh has a door, so the mechitza you're putting up doesn't really do anything. But if it doesn't have a door, and you're putting up a pareiches to cover the Sefer Torah, you're allowed to put that up on Shabbos. Sagt the Gemara weiter, V'alma Shmuel Mishum Rab Chiya, Rab Shmuel said in the name of Rab Chiya. Now we come back to a canopy. So before we said that a canopy is not allowed, it's a temporary tent, it's not allowed unless it was attached from before. Now the Gemara brings a different type of canopy. Kilas chasonim, a canopy that was made for a chasan kala. What kind of a canopy is this? So as Rashi explains, this is a canopy that comes down in a triangular shape. Okay? It comes to a point on the top and it broadens on the bottom. Mutter lintaisa or mutter lefayrka. You're allowed to put it up, you're allowed to dismantle it on Shabbos. It doesn't have the minimum size and qualifications for a tent to not be allowed on Shabbos. Now the Gemara explains now exactly what the case over here is. Rav Sheshes Ravidi explains it depends. That's only if at the top of this kilas chasanim it doesn't have a roof that's the size of a tefach. When it comes to a point at the top, it doesn't mamish come to a point. It has a flat space of a tefach. Then asura, that tefach is enough to make it a tent, and therefore it's asur. This is b'chlal always the shir b'negeh to the isser of making a tent on Shabbos, the shir of a tefach. The Gemara goes weiter. The Chumrah extends even further. Even if the roof does not have a space of a tefach, Nami lo yamaran, the heter was only said, Ela she'ein b'pachis mishloisha samuch legaga tefach. If the roof in the last 3 tvachim, and the top 3 tvachim of it doesn't have the width of a tefach. So if you measure not only the top, but the top 3 tvachim should not have the width of a tefach. But if it does, aval yesh, if it does have the last 3 tvachim at the top a tefach, then also it'll still be aser. Weiter the Gemara continues and says, and some are not geiris this. The Gra, the Agas Agra brings down that the Rambam is not geiris this, and actually the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch also, when he paskins this halacha, doesn't bring the hemshech of the Gemara here. But in our Gemara it says, V'lo yamaran ela she'ein b'shipua tefach. This is only said if you're going to measure the entire shipua, the entire slant, the whole slope of the kilo. It doesn't have a tefach, meaning if you're going to measure, so how does every slant work? It's a point at the top, and it's further broad at the bottom. So if you're going to measure the width of the broadness on the bottom, it's not going to have the width of a tefach. So then, we're talking about, there's always a beam in the middle that's holding up this oil, this kilas chasanim. So you measure it from each side, right? It comes down broader at the bottom and a tip on the top. So you're going to measure at the bottom to see whether there's a tefach in the width of it, towards the middle of where the pole is that's holding it. You measure on this side, you measure on this side. Is there a tefach on each side that's the broadness of this kilo?
Tiny shear.
It's a very tiny shear. I'll discuss that in a second. So if it does not have that tefach, so again, lo yamaran el she'ein b'shipua tefach. So then it'll be allowed. If in the width of it there is a tefach, so then shipua oilim ka'oilim dami, that shipua, that slant that has a width of a tefach is going to qualify to be an oil, and therefore it's not allowed. Now, as you said, it's mamish a tiny shear. This is presumably we're talking about a kilas chasanim that was used for a bed. But Rashi says, based on what the Gemara is saying over here now, this is not a kila that was used for a bed at all. Rashi says, Eina suya lishin tachtel. You can't sleep on something which is not even 2 tvachim wide. It was just made obviously for decorative purposes or whatever. There's another pshat Taisus brings over here that it's possible that this kilas chasanim was made with these canopies, but it was made like with a few canopies. It came down like with 3-4 canopies that are less than 2 tvachim wide, and together they were a large enough canopy over a bed to be able to sleep in it. It's another pshat.
It could be there's a shapur and then it extends afterwards.
But the extension, you have to measure the tefach at the bottom. The shipua at the top is a tip, like a triangle or close to a tip, and then the bottom, whatever broadens out, you have to measure from here to here to see that if it's a tefach.
They do the shipua like this,
okay, and then
this pulls around, so the middle is the shipua, and then it extends.
I hear you.
further.
Okay, Ken Zain. Another detail the Gemara says, another issue of the oil over here could be that this kilo, this material you're using that comes down on this bed, it doesn't go below the bed. It doesn't hang over below the bed. But if it hangs below the bed, even a tefach, so then because it's hanging below the bed, this could be an oil where it's covering things below the bed, and therefore you're adding to an oil. You're making a wall for the bed that becomes an oil, and therefore the bed now becomes a roof with walls, and therefore you're not allowed to do this on Shabbos. So now, this only refers to a case, the Alter Rebbe explains the Shulchan Aruch, this only refers to a case where you're trying to make a covering to actually use what's below it to be protected. That's what an oil is all about. When do you make an oil? An oil you make when you're trying to protect things that are below it, whether from the sun, whether from rain, or anything else, you want to have it protected there. But the Alter Rebbe says, any oil that's just made l'tznius ba'alma is not considered to be min ha-Torah, at least. It's not a gather of an oil b'chlal. Or for example, when you get to a table, that you have a tishtach, a table cover that you place on a table and it hangs below the table like always, at least a tefach, that's not considered to be an inyan of an oil. You're not trying to cover anything that's below the table. It's hanging, and for the niceness, it doesn't end right at the end of the table, it hangs over a little bit. That's not the gather of an oil. The concept of an oil is when you're creating a certain protection to cover what's below it.
The oil inside your house is also the same thing.
Lav dafka, because even within a house, a person might want to cover things that shouldn't be exposed. Even within a house, not lav dafka, I hear you. So the lashon of exposed is maybe not the right lashon. But even in a house, a person might want to make an oil. Usually, you're right. Usually indoors, the person's kavanah of an oil is not for that purpose. But there are some times. Let's say, for example, there's a baby that's sleeping in a carriage, and you want to put a cover on it so to take away some of the light, that the baby should be able to have darkness to sleep. That's an oil. Has a tefach.
Kids making a little oil.
So sometimes they make it, they want to cover, and they have it, it should be dark inside, and they want to play inside with the darkness. It depends. It could be. It's a problem. Okay. Sagt the Gemara weiter. V'amr Rav Sheshes bereid Ravidi. Rav Sheshes said in the name of Ravidi. Hai siyano, a felt hat. This is a kind of felt hat that had a very wide brim. Shari, you're allowed to wear it. Even though it has a wide brim, there's no issue of an oil. Frek the Gemara ha'itmar, but we learned in another place, siyana oser, this wide hat with a wide brim is not allowed. And for the Gemara, like kasha, it's no question, depends how wide your brim is. Hadis be tefach. If it has a brim that's a tefach, so then that's mamash like an oil, even though you're wearing it as a beged, but it's an oil. Had the less be tefach. In a case where the brim is not wide at tefach, that's not allowed. Okay, this could be an issue. I don't know. I mean, the truth is, most hats today I don't think have a width of a tefach, but there could be an issue. 1 second, we're not finished the Gemara. Let's see the Gemara's conclusion here. Ela meyata. If so, sharviv beglima tefach, a person that spreads a talis over his head more than a tefach. Let's say, for example, when you put on a talis and you hold it above your head more than a tefach around you, that would be an issue. That's a problem of making an oil on you. Hachanami de mechayev. This would be an issue of making an oil and the person would be chayev, or hachanami, it would be aser, or there's like it's for sure not oil kavua, but it would be aser. So the Gemara, according to Rashi's pshat, retracts this whole thing. It's not an oil at all. Ela lekashya. It's no question. The Isser is something completely different. Ha de mahadik, ha de loy mahadik. This halacha that Rav Sheshes said that you shouldn't wear this felt hat that has a brim, a wide brim, is because if it's not tight on your head, we're afraid that it's going to blow off your head and you might come to carry it. It's a completely different chash. That it's such a wide brim and it's more prone to being blown off in the wind. And as the Paiskim say, that we're talking about over here about a kind of hat that a person doesn't usually wear it as a hat. It's not very common to wear this as a hat. And therefore, if it's blown off his head, he might pick it up and might walk with it and carry it. And therefore, it's not allowed. But if it's mahadik, if it's tight on your head, we're not afraid it's going to be blown off your head, and therefore, it's allowed to be worn on Shabbos. That's the Rashi's pshat. Taisvis, however, Rabbeinu Chananel says that the pshat over here is mahadik and loy mahadik refers to the brim itself. Mahadik means it's stiff. It's a tefach that comes around you and it's stiff, it's not flexible. That's a case which would be considered to be an oil. Masha'enkin, with the example the Gemara gave before, when a person has a talis over his head and it goes more than a tefach around his head, or a hat where the brim, like the brims of our hats, most of them, are flexible. It's not like a hard piece that remains in its place. So that's something which is not an issue of an oil, because it's flexible. It's not an oil.
Any walls to be an oil?
No, it doesn't have to have walls. If you put something just like we had before, a canopy which has 4 poles by 4 sides, like a chuppah, without any walls whatsoever, that's an oil.
Rashi says
That's by over there the Gemara said, but that's not makif. Anachanami, it said talis kfula, that it comes a little bit down on the side, true, but it's not, even without coming down on the side, it's still an oil. Anachanami, but you don't, oil is even just a roof without any mechitzas whatsoever.
According to Rashi, we're going back and saying
Correct.
it can't be an oil.
Correct. According to Rashi, you wear something on your head, it's not an oil either way.
The same thing works with an umbrella, like you're making.
No, umbrella you don't wear on your head. Umbrella is spoken already about by G'dayli HaPaiskim, already the earlier Paiskim, the native Yehuda and others speak about an umbrella. You don't wear it on your head, you're holding it. It's a temporary oil, no question, but it's still a shaila. An umbrella is a big problem. That's what oil is. Oil is baina. Making an oil is baina. It's a tilde of baina. Yeah.
It's the whole time you're holding it up to make it.
And chanami, but you're not wearing it as a garment on your head, so it's a different thing. But an umbrella is definitely a problem. Sagt der Gemara weiter, Shalich le Rami by Yecheskel Rav Huna, Rami by Yecheskel Center Rav Huna. Eimelon easy. Tell me, my friend, Hanach Milim Al Yisa, these very good things, these good nyanim that we learned, the Amrit Lo Mishmei de Rav, that you said, that you always said in the name of Rav. Tarti b'Shabbos, there were two halachas that you said in the name of Rav regarding Shabbos, v'chada b'Torah, and one thing that you said in the name of Rav regarding Torah. Shalach Lei sent them back the two halachas regarding Shabbos. The Tanya, this is what we learned in a Braise, good bekisna. This leather thing that we learned before that has drawstrings, right? This leather thing that they spread out sometimes to cover over things. Mutal and Taisa b'Shabbos, you're allowed to spread it out on Shabbos. Omar Rav, so Rav said, now over here it says it's mutal and taisa. Before we said it's aser. Over here the aser midrabanan. Over here the Gemara says that it's mutal and taisa. So Omar Rav says about this, Loishano ela bebeis b'nei Adam. That's only if two people are spreading it out. So Rashi says when two people are spreading it out together, they don't spread it out that well. It's not drawn out as well, and therefore it's not, even as a temporary tent, it's not a good tent. When you have one person that's doing it by himself, so he ties it on one side, then he comes to the other side, then he comes to the third side and the fourth side, and he ties it very tightly, he ties it very well. So then it's going to be aser. Amar Abaye said, Vikila, when you're making a canopy, afilu b'yud b'nei Adam, even if 10 people are together participating in making this canopy, aser, it's not allowed, midrabanan, if it's a temporary canopy. When they make this canopy, it's usually made in a way that it's drawn out well, even if it's not perfect, but it's in a way that it's a temporary dwelling, temporary oil, and it's aser. That was the first halacha that Rav said, in the name of Rav he said. Idach Ma'i, another thing he said in the name of Rav, the Tanya we learned, Kirosh and Nishmata Achas Mayarkisel, an oven that one of its legs fell out. Mutal Taltala, you're allowed to move it on Shabbos. It's still usable and it's not muktzah, so you could move it on Shabbos. Shtayim, if two of the legs fell out, also, then it's not allowed. It can't be used anymore, so it's not allowed. So Rav argues on this brayso, and Rav says, Afil echad nami yoser. Even if just one leg fell out, it's also not allowed. We're afraid that he might put back in the leg and he might screw it in, or he might put it in tightly, and therefore there's a gzeira midrabanan not to move it around once the leg fell out. That was two halachas that he said regarding Shabbos. Teire d'amar Rav, regarding Teire, what did Rav say? So Rav said, Asida Teire shetishtachich mi Yisrael. It'll come a time period that Teire will be forgotten from Yidden. Shenemar, it says in the pasuk, V'hifla shemes makoischa, the Eibush will bring upon you very, very extraordinary makis. Haflazu any de'amau, what does this refer to? Kishuaim, it says in another pasuk, L'chein hinini Yosef lahafli yisa'am azeh hafla v'fela. And as Rashi brings the end of that pasuk, it says, V'ovda chochmas chachamav, that the Yidden will forget Teire. Ha've'omer hafla zu Teire. So when it says v'hiflas Hashem, it means that the Yidden will forget Teire. Tana Rabbanon, the Rabbanon learned K'shenichnasu Rabbeinu leKeren b'Yavne, when the Chachamim came to Keren b'Yavne. We had a few times Keren b'Yavne, they came to Yavne and they were seated in like in a vineyard, like the rows of a vineyard. Amru, they said, Asida Teire shetishtachich mi Yisrael, there'll be a time period, Teire will be forgotten from amongst Yidden. Shenem, it says in the pasuk, Hine yamim bam num Hashem alekim ve'shlachti rav ba'aretz, there'll be a hunger in the land. Loi rav lalechem v'loi tzama lamayim kim l'shmaya as divrei Hashem. Not hunger for bread, not thirsty for water, they'll be hungry to hear the words of the Eibishter. It says in the pasuk, "V'no miyam ad yam," and they'll be moving, they'll be traveling from yam to yam, or mitzafim ad mizrach, from north to the east. Yishaytetu, they'll be searching, levakish es dvar Hashem, to search for the words of the Eibishter, v'lo yimtzo, and they won't find. So in this klala that the Gemara says over here, that the Torah will be forgotten, you see the greatest bracha, that loy rav lalecha v'loy tzama lamayim, that people will be thirsty only for Torah. People will be looking and searching in this time to learn Torah. The Gemara continues, Dvar Hashem, when it says here that they'll be looking for Dvar Hashem, Zu Halacha, refers to the halacha of Torah that will be forgotten. Dvar Hashem zeh kates. People will be searching. Dvar Hashem refers to the kates. People will want to know when's the end of Golus. And Dvar Hashem zu nevuah. Dvar Hashem refers to nevuah, that there won't be any nevuah anymore. Interesting, Rashi says regarding Dvar Hashem zeh kates, where do you see that the kates is considered to be Dvar Hashem? Torah is called Dvar Hashem. Dvar Hashem zu halacha. Nevuah is called Dvar Hashem. But where do you see that kates is called Dvar Hashem? Interesting. Maybe this is the Indian of Mashiach is Hesach Hadas. Lo yadayna. It's Lamayla miyadiyah. That's the Indian of the kates. Yeah, we're starting the 9 days. And this Indian, the Indian of the Galus and the forgetting Torah, correct. What's an example that they're going to look for Dvar Hashem and they won't have the halacha to answer halacha? So the Gemara here gives an example for this. It doesn't mean kipshuta that mamish Torah will be forgotten completely amongst Yidden, but it means when it's going to come to paskin adin, there's going to be difficulty in paskining a halacha, as the Gemara here explains. I see the isha shatitl kika shel truma. A woman is going to come with a bread from truma. Now this is a bread that was obviously baked in an oven. And it was baked in an oven that was tamei. And now she's going to come with this bread baked in an oven that's tamei, and she has a question. The tachsev about the knesiyas, about the midrashis, she's going to come asking the question, Leida im tmei vim teirihi, is this bread tamei or tahir? That's going to be the question that people will not be able to answer. Ve'im maven, no one's going to know, no one will understand im teirihi vim tmei, to know if it's tahir or tamei. Frekte Gemara, so this is part of the question actually. Frekte Gemara, ve'ein meiven im tahiri vim tmeihi. People won't be able to answer her whether this bread baked in an oven that was tamei, if it's tamei or tahir. Behed yiksivbe. This is says clearly in the Torah. Mikol ha'oichel asher ye'achel, talking about something that was baked inside an oven. Any food that was inside an oven becomes tamei. Okay, so what are we talking about over here? We're talking about an oven that a sheretz came inside the oven. Okay, an earthenware oven. What's the halacha of a klicheres? The halacha of a klicheres is you have a sheretz that enters into the airspace of the klicheres, it becomes tamei. And it says there in the pasuk that food that's inside becomes tamei. So what do you mean no one will know the answer? It's a befedish pasuk. So the Gemara is saying they're not going to forget psukim of Torah. Ela leida im rishaynehi vim shnihi. They're not going to know to answer whether it's a rishon l'tumah or a sheni l'tumah, the bread that's inside the oven. Frekte Gemara ve'ein mevin, and they're not going to be able to answer this. Hanami masnisni. This is a befedish Mishnah, and the Gemara says a befedish Mishnah for sure nobody's going to forget. Kedetna we learned in the Mishnah sheret shenimtza b'tanara pas shebetoicha shnia. If you have a sheret that was inside the airspace of an oven, the bread that's inside of it becomes a sheni l'tumah. Why a sheni l'tumah? Sha'tanor tchila. The tanor becomes a rishon l'tumah from this sheret, and the bread becomes a sheni l'tumah. So the Gemara, no, they're going to have a difficulty paskening like this Mishnah because they're going to have the following question. Mistapkeluhu, the doubt is going to be, ha, the Amalei Rav Ada bar Ava l'Rava, because of the question on this Mishnah that Rav Ada bar Ava asked to Rava. Lech ze hai tanure command the mali tumah. If the tumah of the klisha of the sheretz, how does the tumah come to the klisheretz? Not by touching the walls of the oven of the klish of the sheretz doesn't touch the walls. Just by being suspended in the space, in the ear space of the oven, it becomes tamei. So let's consider the entire ear space to be filled with tamei, with the heavy pasri shaina. So in that case, the bread inside the oven should not be touching a rishon l'tumah, which is the walls of the oven. The whole oven is like filled with the sheretz, and therefore the bread itself should become a rishon l'tumah, just like the oven itself. That's the problem that they'll have with this Mishnah, and therefore they won't know how to paskin. Amalei, so he answered and he explained, Lo yamrinon lech zahai tanur command tumah. We don't say this. We don't paskin this way that we consider the whole oven to be like it's filled with the tumah of the sheretz. The Tanya, because we learned in the Braise regarding a keli. What's the halacha of a keli? This is something we learned before also. A keli does not become sheni l'tumah. A keli only becomes rishon l'tumah, not sheni l'tumah. At least not min ha-Torah. I would think that kalim that are inside an oven should become tamei from this oven that became a rishon l'tumah. Only food becomes a sheni l'tumah. The food becomes a sheni l'tumah from the oven, but the kalim do not become a sheni l'tumah. So what do I see from this? That in the oven itself, it's not the oven, the ear space of the oven is not like the whole thing is filled with tumah. No, the walls become a rishil l'tumah, and then the food would become a sheni l'tumah. And the kalim do not become a sheni l'tumah. So this is the conclusion of this Indian. This is the halacha that this woman will come into Beis Medrash and they won't be able to answer. So it's so interesting. The Gemara is saying that this is the question that the woman will come into Beis Medrash and will not be able to be answered. And the Gemara itself is explaining it and is answering it and is giving the halacha and is telling you how to answer this halacha. So the Eibusher, with all the gzeiros of the Eibusher and all the inyanim of Golus that it says that we'll forget Torah, right over here, the Eibusher gives us a Tanaim with Amiroim and that are able to answer these questions. Yeah. Okay, so we've got another one more tiny shtickle of the Gemara. Tanya Rav Shimon Yechi Yaime Chas v'Shalom shetishtachach Torah mi Yisrael. God forbid to say that the Torah will be forgotten amongst Yidden. Shenemar Ki lois yishakach mi Pizare. The Torah will not be forgotten from his descendants. Elamani mekayim yishaytu l'lakish divrei Hashem. So what is it referring to when it says that they're going to be searching for the Eibusher's words? V'lo yimtzau, and they won't find an answer. Shelo yimtzu halacha brura o mishnah brura b'makim echad. It won't be possible to find a clear halacha. What is halacha brura? So Rashi says halacha brura b'taimim. To have the halacha with all the reasons, without any machlokes, to find that in one place, that won't be possible. Today you learn Torah, not always you have the taimim to be able to paskin, and then there's a machlokes, you have to see what this pasuk says, what that pasuk says, and mishnah brura, to have a clear halacha. So this refers to having the clear mishnah, to know the girsa of every mishnah and every braisa, to have that all b'makom echad. That's something that in the Zman HaGolus we won't have.